Hi guys, today we are going to discuss about some things that can go wrong during the maintenance of the XC-cycling slave cylinders. So if you follow the instructions that are provided on the comprehensive maintenance manual that you can find on the XC-cycling website, nothing will go wrong. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye! Okay, that's true, but there are some details that are worth mentioning in this video so as to help you get the most out of your braking system and most importantly, avoid damaging the XC-cycling slave cylinders. I decided to make this video as it's been many months since I released the XC-cycling slave cylinders, and considering the feedback I've got from the riders that got them and the initial test riders, I've seen some mistakes that can be made and affect their performance or even damage the slave cylinders. Before we dive into the details, it's worth mentioning that you can find any information you seek about the XC-cycling slave cylinders, their maintenance and their operation on the comprehensive manual that you will find at the XC-cycling website. Also, I've already released some videos discussing the anatomy and the maintenance of the XC-cycling slave cylinders, and so if you haven't watched the videos already, or if you want to check out the manual, you will find the relevant links in the description below. At that point, I have to tell you that the real reason that I make this video is that I want to be as clear as possible with you guys about the products I develop for the XC-cycling project. I don't want to release and push products that I'm not sure that are the best products I could develop or manufacture. As you may understand, this means that I have to be as honest with you as possible, and also it implies that I take your feedback in serious consideration. Also, this is why I stopped selling the XC-cycling brake pads for more than a year, and currently I'm working on a new updated version. But more on this project on a future video when I finish developing the second version of the brake pads. So let's dive into the main topic of this video and discuss about the slave cylinders and what can go wrong. There are 3 points that need more attention when you maintain your slave cylinders. The first one has to do with the brake clamps and the maximum tightening torque that you apply on the bolts. This torque should not be over 3.5 Nm for bolts that have been treated with anti-seize grease before their assembly, as this may deform the slave cylinders and pinch the piston inside them, affecting their movement and the performance of your brakes. Keep in mind that you should experiment with the tightening torque and settle with the least value of tightening torque that still works for you and your riding style. Also, it has to be mentioned that the actual tightening torque also depends on the condition of the threads of your brake mounts and if you use anti-seize grease or thread locker on the bolts or not. So you get it that you should experiment with the tightening torque to find the sweet spot that works for you and doesn't affect the performance of your brakes. Speaking of anti-seize grease, I strongly recommend you to use the XC-cycling anti-seize grease on the bolts of your brake clamps, as it prevents the galvanic corrosion between the aluminum bolt mounts and the steel, stainless steel or even titanium bolts. So if you are looking for the anti-seize grease with the highest quality possible, check out the XC-cycling anti-seize grease that was recently released. It's a super high quality ceramic anti-seize grease that is compatible with all the metals we use on our products and hence all the metals that are used by the rest of the bike industry. I'm not going to dive deeper into the properties of this awesome new product as it deserves a dedicated video. So subscribe to make sure that you get notified when it's released. The second point that needs a bit attention when you maintain your slave cylinders has to do with the tightening torque of the bleed port of the XC-cycling slave cylinders. The bleed port has been designed to seal using an O-ring, and so it does not need to be tightened very hard, as this could damage the body of the slave cylinders. The tightening torque of the bleed port should be at most 2.5 Nm, and if you do not have a torque wrench, you should just slightly tighten it after it contacts the slave cylinder body in order to apply a bit of preload and prevent it from getting loose when you ride. Be careful, as it's very easy to over-tighten the bleed port of your slave cylinders, as it needs a 5mm Allen key, and I know that you have been used to more heavily tighten bolts with this Allen key, such as your wheels axles or your stem. It has to be underlined that in case of the bleed port, the 5mm Allen socket has been designed to remove as much weight as possible and not to allow for heavy tightening. If you over-tighten the bleed port, you may force the bleed bolt into the O-ring socket and damage the body of the slave cylinder. This had happened once during the testing period of the XC-cycling slave cylinders, and I feel that I have to make it as clear as possible as I don't want it to happen again. You have to keep in mind that the XC-cycling slave cylinders are as lightweight as possible and they won't take any abuse due to bad maintenance. So you have to follow the manual, and if you have any issues that are not discussed in the manual, feel free to contact me via our social media accounts or via email, and I'll be happy to help you resolve any issues and of course update the manual if needed. On the other hand, the XC-cycling slave cylinders may be designed to be as lightweight as possible, and you have to be careful when you maintain them, but the used materials have the highest possible strength to wear ratio for each part, and so they're designed to withstand all the riding related abuse that you can throw on them. So if you take proper care of them, you won't have any issues and you will be able to push them as hard as you want while riding. The last point that needs a bit attention when you maintain your slave cylinders has to do with the bolt that keeps everything together, and especially if you got the titanium versions of the slave cylinders. This is a countersunk M4 bolt with a 2.5mm hex socket, and so you need a 2.5mm Allen key to tighten it or get it loose. Given that the Reassembly slave cylinders come already assembled to you, the first time that you'll mess with this M4 bolt is when you decide that you want to take everything apart to fully maintain, clean and re-grease your slave cylinders. You have to be very careful, especially when you have one of the titanium versions, as it's quite easy to strip the hex socket of the bolt if your Allen key is not in good condition, or if you try to undo the bolt and the slave cylinder is not securely fixed in place. For example, if you don't hold it safely in your hand and it slips when you try to undo the bolt. So I strongly advise you to use a nice flat Allen key and undo the bolt while pushing the Allen key towards the bolt, and also while the slave cylinders are still on your bike, or at least make sure that you hold them tight before you proceed. Please do not use a vise to hold the slave cylinder as you maintain them, as it may damage or deform their main body. Keep in mind that if your Allen key that you are going to use is a bit rounded, you can shorten it a little bit and make it perfectly flat again. If by any means you damage the Allen socket of the bolt and you cannot take it apart, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. You can carefully use an appropriate bolt extractor kit and remove it. For this, you'll typically need a 2.5mm diameter carbide drill and the relevant extractor for this size of bolts. If this is too difficult or too complicated for you, you can always send it back to us and we'll do it for you. The Reassembly slave cylinders have been designed to be fully repairable, and this means that as long as the main body of their assembly is still okay, everything else can be repaired or replaced to make your slave cylinder as good as new again. If you follow the disassembly instructions and you successfully remove these M4 bolts, it means that you have proceeded with the full maintenance of your slave cylinders, and now it's time to retighten the bolt. This can also be a little tricky, but it's not that hard. First of all, you have to make sure that you use the Reassembly anti-seize grease to fully cover the threads and the countersunk cone of the bolt. Please do not neglect this step, as it could result to galvanic corrosion between the bolt and the body of the slave cylinder, and this will make the next disassembly a nightmare and will raise the probability to actually damage the main body of the slave cylinders. At this point, you should also check the condition of the O-ring that seals the back of the slave cylinders. If it's damaged, you should replace it before you continue, as not doing it may result to leaks, and so the slave cylinders will not work properly. Generally, I think that it's not very easy to damage this O-ring, but it's a good idea to thoroughly check everything before you reassemble your slave cylinders. After applying a generous amount of the Reassembly anti-seize grease, checking the O-ring and start tightening the M4 bolt, you are very close to finish with the assembly of the slave cylinders. At that point, you have to make sure that the bolt tightens properly and doesn't just slip. There are some times that you are trying to screw this M4 bolt, but the internal piston rod is spinning with it and you cannot get it to properly tighten and seal the slave cylinder. This may be due to a bit of grease that may have reached the end of the piston rod pocket inside the slave cylinder, or due to any other reason. To overcome it, it may require a bit of faster rotation of the Allen wrench, or a bit of side push on the Allen wrench to increase the friction a little bit and rotate the screw enough to start tightening as it's supposed to do. Once you tighten the screw, make sure that the final tightening torque is no more than 2.5 Nm, otherwise you may damage the screw and the thread of the piston rod. I personally go for 2 Nm, but it can withstand up to 2.5 Nm. To sum up, if you pay a bit more attention to these 3 tricky points and you follow the instructions that are provided on the Reassembly braking system manual, you won't have any issues with your slave cylinders and you'll be able to ride with them for a very long time. Also, keep in mind that I'm always available to discuss with you about any issues that you may face while using the Reassembly slave cylinders and they're not already described in the manual, and actually your feedback will help us update the Reassembly braking system manual and also eliminate any issues in the future versions of the Reassembly slave cylinders. Our aim is to make the best possible products for bike trials, and this means that we are willing to keep optimizing each of our products whenever it's required. That's it for today, guys, and I hope that you found this video quite helpful. Please feel free to ask any questions about the Reassembly slave cylinders or their maintenance procedure, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you in the comment section below. Also, keep an eye on our social media feed, as I've started uploading short videos related to bike maintenance and general engineering related topics. Thank you so much for subscribing and watching, and until next time, have fun riding your bikes and make sure that your brakes are as snappy as possible. Bye! Okay, let's just throw this on. Instead of pushing it in, I'm gonna just turn it, hoping that it will get destroyed. No, it didn't.